Welcome to the Hoja on Architecture podcast, the Architecture of Experience Chapter 2, The Entering Body, Who is Space Really For? This season is called The Architecture of Experience, and in the previous chapter, we reframed ergonomics as a way of understanding how space is lived rather than simply measured. We moved away from numbers as fixed truths and began to see them as partial translations of something far more complex: human experience. In this chapter, we take the next step in that shift by asking a deceptively simple question. If experience is central to architecture, where does it actually begin? The answer is both obvious and often overlooked. It begins with the body. Not the abstract body of diagrams and averages, but the present, moving, perceiving body that enters space and transforms it from an empty condition into a lived reality. Before a body enters, space exists only as potential. It may be designed, drawn, modeled, and even built, but it has not yet been experienced. Walls define boundaries, floors define surfaces, and objects define arrangements, yet none of these elements becomes meaningful until they are encountered. The moment a body steps into space, something shifts. Distances become effort, heights become reach, surfaces become resistance, and volumes become atmosphere. Space is no longer neutral. It begins to act, to respond, to invite, and to restrict. In this sense, the body does not simply occupy space, it activates it. This activation is not a dramatic event, but a continuous condition. Every movement, however small, produces a spatial effect. Turning the head changes perception. Adjusting posture changes balance. Walking across a room transforms distance into duration. These micro-interactions are rarely visible in drawings, yet they define the lived reality of architecture. They are the difference between a space that is technically correct and one that is experientially meaningful. To design with the body in mind is therefore not to add another layer to architecture, but to recognize a layer that has always been there. Despite this, design discourse often treats the body as secondary. We speak of users, occupants, and inhabitants, terms that appear inclusive but remain abstract. The user is a convenient figure, one that allows design to operate at a general level, but it also distances us from the specificity of real bodies. A user does not get tired. A user does not struggle with reach. A user does not hesitate at thresholds or adjust movement based on discomfort. These are qualities of bodies, not users. And when design replaces the body with the user, it risks losing the very condition it claims to serve. This becomes particularly evident when we ask a more precise question: whose body is being considered? The idea of a universal user quickly begins to dissolve. Bodies differ in size, strength, mobility, and perception. They differ across age, gender, culture, and ability. What feels accessible to one body may be restrictive to another. What feels comfortable to one person may be exhausting to another. These differences are not exceptions to a norm. They are the reality of human diversity. Yet design often operates as if a single standard body could represent them all. This is where ergonomics, when properly understood, begins to challenge its own foundations. It forces us to confront the limitations of generalization and to acknowledge that every design decision carries implicit assumptions about who will use the space and how. A corridor width is not just a dimension, it is a statement about movement. A seat height is not just a number, it is a decision about posture. A threshold is not just a detail, it is a moment that either includes or excludes. In this sense, the body is not only present in space, it is embedded within the logic of design itself. Once this is recognized, the relationship between body and space begins to shift. The body is no longer understood as something that adapts to design, but as something that actively shapes it. Space does not exist independently of the body. It is continuously produced through interaction. This does not mean that architecture loses its autonomy, but that its meaning emerges through use. A staircase is not simply a sequence of steps. It is an experience of ascent and descent. A doorway is not just an opening, it is a transition between conditions. A room is not merely an enclosure, it is a field of movement, perception, and occupation. This perspective introduces a different way of thinking about design. Instead of starting with form and asking how it will be used, we begin with the body and ask what kinds of spatial conditions it requires. Instead of designing objects that are later inhabited, we consider how inhabitation itself can generate design decisions. This does not eliminate creativity, it redirects it. It shifts the focus from what space looks like to how it behaves, from static composition to dynamic interaction. At the same time, this approach complicates the designer's role. If space is co-produced by the body, then design can no longer claim complete control over its outcomes. The designer sets conditions, but the body interprets them. Movement is guided but not dictated. Experience is shaped but not fully determined. This introduces a level of uncertainty that is often uncomfortable, yet it is also what makes architecture responsive. It allows space for variation, adaptation to different bodies, and openness to multiple interpretations. This openness is particularly important when considering inclusion. Designing for a single idealized body inevitably excludes others. To take the body seriously is therefore to take diversity seriously. It requires an awareness that design is never neutral, that it always privileges certain ways of moving, seeing, and occupying space over others. The challenge is not to eliminate this bias, which may be impossible, but to make it visible and to engage with it critically. This is where ergonomics moves beyond efficiency and safety, becoming a tool for reflection as much as for optimization. However, recognizing the centrality of the body also leads to a new problem. If experience is grounded in bodily interaction, how can it be translated into a form that design can work with? Architecture relies on representation, on drawings, models, and specifications that allow ideas to be communicated and constructed. Yet the body resists simple representation. Its movements are fluid, its perceptions subjective, and its responses context-dependent. Capturing this complexity within a design system is not straightforward. This is where measurement re-enters the discussion. Anthropometric data, ergonomic standards, and spatial guidelines attempt to bridge the gap between lived experience and design systems. They provide a way to translate the body into a form usable in the design process. But as we have already seen, this translation is never complete. Something is always lost in the process. The richness of experience is reduced to numbers, the variability of bodies to averages, and the dynamics of movement to fixed dimensions. This does not make measurement irrelevant, but it does reveal its limits. It shows that while numbers can inform design, they cannot fully define it. The body exceeds the systems that attempt to capture it, and it is precisely this excess that makes architecture both challenging and meaningful. To design with the body in mind is therefore not to seek perfect representation, but to work with approximation, to balance precision with sensitivity, and to remain aware of what cannot be fully measured. In this chapter, we have moved from the abstract idea of experience to its most immediate condition, the body. We have seen how the presence of the body transforms space, reveals the limitations of the user as a concept, and challenges design to engage with diversity and uncertainty. More importantly, we have begun to understand that architecture is not simply about creating space, but about shaping the conditions under which space is experienced. In the next chapter, we will move from the body's presence to the problem of measuring it. We will examine how design attempts to translate bodily experience into numbers, standards, and systems, and where this translation begins to fail. The discussion will shift from embodiment to quantification, from lived interaction to abstract data. Because once the body becomes central to design, the next question becomes unavoidable. Can something as complex as human experience ever be reduced to measurement? This concludes Chapter 2 of The Architecture of Experience. The Entering Body, Who is Space Really For? Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.